Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, October 18th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
So, Ben, you asked what's going on, and the answer is nothing. Like, the news has been, last week it was a lot going on. This week it's next to nothing. Before we get into the news, actually, I did want to read a quick listener email or tweet. The other day, I wondered why there were so many baseball movies in the early 1990s. And a listener named Rob G. wrote in basically explaining that the MLB rented them out in the rented out their stadiums in the off season because in 1993 they had a strike, and without games, they used the stadiums for revenue in 1994 from Hollywood. So that is why we got so many baseball movies in the early 1990s. According to Rob G, I've not obviously fact-checked this information.
I thought it was just because Kevin Costner was hugely famous in the 90s. So
that could be as well. I mean, it could be a combination of things, but I do know that the strike did happen, and it does seem to correlate with a bunch of these movies being produced in 93, 94. So, anyways, I just thought I'd bring it up. I thought that was kind of interesting. But let's jump into the news. Let's start off with a couple updates from yesterday's show. I think I mentioned that we were talking about Marvel's TV series on Netflix, and we were kind of wondering, what does Disney's streaming service mean for the future of those shows? And we finally got a confirmation, I think, a little bit, at least some kind of clarification here from the Netflix heads. HT, what do we know?
So the Disney streaming service means nothing, essentially, to the Netflix Marvel shows. Basically, the Netflix Chief Content Officer, Ted Sarandos, confirmed that Netflix plans to continue making their Marvel shows for the foreseeable future. His exact quote in an interview with Inverse was, "Those shows are for us to cancel, and we're super happy with their performance so far." Aside from the Iron Fist, which they just canceled, of course. But it seems that this is
their decision. It was Disney's decision.
Yeah, it's separate from anything that Disney or that Marvel Studios is doing on the cinematic side or even on the TV streaming side, because we know that Disney is planning their own Marvel shows with the Loki and Scarlet Witch spinoffs. So I think there was a report a little while ago that about the goings-on and the Disney Marvel corporate world right now, and that there would not be any new Marvel shows at Netflix. They would all go to the streaming service, but Netflix's current shows such as Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, The Punisher, and maybe Defenders would go on to have second, third, fourth, maybe even fifth season. So it doesn't seem to there's not a lot of clarity on whether they can make spin-offs of these shows or whether these are the only titles they could continue making. But that seems to be the contract with the Netflix Marvel shows right now.
Yeah, I am pretty sure my assumption's correct that basically Netflix owns the rights to these characters for the time being, as long as they continue to still make these shows, and probably any characters established in those universes. So I don't think we'll see any spin-offs on Disney's streaming service from the Netflix shows. I think it's going to be almost like a Netflix Marvel cinematic universe of sorts, kind of off to the side. Another story we talked about yesterday, we talked about Jason Blum, who made some really stupid comments about why he has not hired a female director for any of the Blumhouse movies. And HG, you also wrote an update on this story. What do we know?
Yes, so after the backlash that Jason Blum and Blumhouse received following his comments that quote, "There are not a lot of female directors, period, and even less who are inclined to do horror," unquote. He has issued an apology for these comments that he called dumb and that he will do better, essentially. So he said, Thank you everyone for calling me out on my dumb comments in that interview. I made a stupid mistake. I spoke too quickly about a serious issue, an issue I am passionate about. Yada, yada, yada. I heard from many today. The way my passion came out was dumb, and for that, I'm sorry. I will do better. And later, in a red carpet interview with Variety for Halloween, he said that he's already setting out to meet more women for directorial roles or what you have it, and that he has used this as sort of a learning experience.
It's sad that we live in a world where the reaction comments from the head of Blumhouse is more respectable than that of the President of the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's good that he was so quick to respond to this, and clearly it seems like he's making some progress to look at some female directors, for future Blumhouse movies. So I think that's a win-win, right?
Yeah, I think so. He really took it in stride, and he used it as a way to basically better himself and better Blumhouse's directive in a way, which I think is a really good way to approach this kind of thing. Because you could easily lash out and say, "Oh, it's not my fault" and stuff, and we've seen that happen before with directors who have been criticized for this kind of thing. But he has really taken it as he said before, a learning experience, which is good.
Let's move on to Marvel Comics, who is going to be taking inspiration from Marvel Studios' Captain Marvel for their new Captain Marvel comic book run. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so basically for the past 40 years, the origin story of the character Captain Marvel has remained the same. And it's very complicated, but I'll give you a very, very quick, streamlined version. So the Air Force pilot Carol Danvers meets an alien Kree warrior named Mar-Vell in the comics, who is posing as a human scientist. And then a Kree weapon blows up really close to Carol Danvers and fuses her DNA with Mar-Vell's. And that basically turns her into a human Kree hybrid and gives her the superpowers that we know that Captain Marvel has. But in a new origin story that is going to be in the 4th issue, it's actually in stores right now, available right now digitally and in comic book stores, of a comic called Life of Captain Marvel. The backstory is changing to reflect what we're going to see in the upcoming Marvel Studios Captain Marvel movie. So in the new comic, it's revealed that Carol Danvers' mother is a member of the Kree race. So that automatically makes Carol a half-human, half-Kree person from birth. And then instead of her DNA fusing with Mar-Vell's during this explosion, it turns out that the explosion basically just activated the latent powers that were within her. And that's kind of a big deal because it basically means that it no longer she no longer is relying on this male character to sort of, I guess, bestow these powers upon her by this whole DNA fusing situation. It's like she's had it within her the whole time. And as the Hollywood Reporter points out, it's a purposeful shift that befits the company's repositioning of the character as a model of female empowerment. So it's kind of a cool thing. It may seem like a little change, but that's kind of a big deal. It's one of those things that is going to go a long way for a lot of people. And this character obviously has a lot riding on her in the movie anyway, being the first female-led solo movie of Marvel Studios, which has produced, 23 movies or something at this point. So, yeah, that's kind of cool.
Do we know that this is the same origin as in the new movie?
Yeah, actually, HT wrote an article in early September that says that Captain Marvel's Carol Danvers is part human, part Kree, and that was part of I think Entertainment Weekly did some one of their slow drip reveals of some information from the movie. So we know that is going to be the case with Brie Larson's version of the character.
Very cool. It's interesting that Marvel doesn't do expanded universe stuff. I know, Kevin Feige is such a big fan of Star Wars, and Star Wars has that whole, expanded universe. The stories go, interconnecting throughout different mediums. And Marvel kind of has their comic book universe and the Marvel cinematic universe. And I know there are sometimes prequel comics to the movies, but there really isn't a way for people that love the movies to kind of continue the same adventures of that exact character in the comics. But it is interesting that in a way, the movies improve on the comics, and then the comics then are influenced by the movies. It's like this, reciprocal process.
Yeah, it makes sense too because movies are a really easy access point for new fans of superheroes, and by changing the origin stories to sort of match the movies a little bit closer, they're basically making it more streamlined so that fans who come in from the movies can easily just become comic book fans.
Do we know of any other occasions of the movies completely revamping the comics in a big way?
I found this article on IO9 that has a list of times that the movies have influenced the comics, and a couple of the entries they have on there are for the movie Blade. I guess Blade's powers were wildly different in the comics before the movie came along, and then the comics sort of adapted to what the movie established. And then also in one of the many versions of the X-Men comics that came out after Bryan Singer's X-Men movie, the X-Men characters got like a wardrobe revamping to sort of reflect closer to that black leather look that appeared. Like ironically, fans kind of hated those costumes when that movie came out, but I guess one of the comics gave them the costumes that are very, very close to that.
But none of these examples are from the Marvel Cinematic Universe that Disney owns and runs, right?
No.
That's correct.
Okay, let's move on to It Takes Two, a scripted comedy series at Fox coming from, of all people, the Property Brothers. News is slow, guys. We
No,
need to talk about something.
this is important news, Peter. The Property Brothers are a gift to HGTV watchers, and I'm very happy that they're going to have their own TV series.
By the way, I am mocking the story, but I am an avid watcher of the Property Brothers. By the way, I mean, they're Canadian, right?
Yes.
Yeah. They just seem like perfect in every way. Like nothing ever seems to I've watched so many episodes of that show, and it seems like those guys have like no flaws whatsoever.
They do seem genetically engineered in the lab to be like the ideal of the unthreatening male idol. Which is why I love them so much. They're just so charming and fun, and they're identical twins who have these megawatt smiles and are very good at their jobs too.
And I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but they actually write, direct, and produce most of their stuff. So they are heavily involved with all of those shows. Like it's not just a lot of those shows you have a host that appears, or characters that appear on these reality series, but they are very, very involved in the whole process.
Which is probably why they're going to be getting their own scripted comedy series at Fox. So the Property Brothers, a.k.a. Jonathan and Drew Scott, wrote a memoir called It Takes Two, and that memoir is now being adapted into a Fox TV series, which is currently committed to a script. And we don't know whether this will be picked up for pilot yet, but this is currently in development, and it will follow their story about two entrepreneurial twin brothers who decide to join forces in the real estate business when they realize they are stronger together than apart. So this is the first, I think, fictionalized, scripted series that is spawned from an HGTV series, but the Property Brothers have their own several reality shows, including the titular Property Brothers. There's Brothers versus Brother and Property Brothers at Home, in which the two brothers, one of which is a contractor and the other of which is a real estate agent, work together to buy a fixer-upper house for a family and then fix it up and renovate it.
And both of the brothers are actually actors. Do we know if they're actually going to appear in this show about their origin story show?
We don't know yet. There's no news on casting. We only know that a script is currently being worked on by John and Josh Silberman, who wrote It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and the upcoming Wile E. Coyote movie. But it's possible that they could have a cameo or maybe even star in it. I didn't know they were actually actors. I do know that one is an illusionist,
Yes.
which Peter was excited about. But that would be really cool if they starred in it as well. I mean, like they have movie star looks, so I would totally watch them.
Who could possibly play them on the small screen? Like, I can't imagine anybody being the Property Brothers other than the Property Brothers.
That's true. They're very tied to their brand. I would watch them, especially if they starred in it, because if it was someone else and they didn't live up to the expectations I have for the Property Brothers, then I might not watch it. But I think if they starred in it, I definitely would tune in.
Ben, do you have any experience with the Property Brothers?
Guys, all of this has gone totally over my head. I don't watch this. I have no idea who these people are. I've never even seen them before. So I've just been sitting here quietly in the corner.
You have some homework, Ben. You and Amy have to sit down in front of the TV in HGTV and watch an episode of the Property Brothers.
Peter,
Which, by the way, is the best HGTV show. Fight me on that.
I'm going to quit, Peter, if you make me do this.
Strangely, I think you would enjoy it. But okay, let's move on. Let's now talk about this abandoned Rambo movie that they're now actually making with Sylvester Stallone still starring, but it's no longer a Rambo movie. Ben, tell us about it.
Yeah, this is a really weird story. So in 2009, this was just 1 year after the fourth Rambo movie came out, Sylvester Stallone was talking about making Rambo 5, which was then referred to as Rambo 5: The Savage Hunt. And this version of the movie he was very excited about, and it would have basically taken a hard turn into sci-fi territory, where Rambo would have basically faced off against this genetically engineered creature. And that movie was in the works for a long time. We heard a lot about it, and then, of course, time passed and it never happened. Rambo 5 is actually filming right now, but it's not this version. It's basically, it appears to be more of a Western version. I think Chris talked about it a couple days ago on the podcast. Rambo is battling a Mexican cartel in the new movie, so it's not sci-fi at all. But Stallone liked that story, that concept so much that almost 10 years later, he's making that into a separate movie. And he's going to be starring in it, but he's just not going to be playing John Rambo in it. So the idea is based on this sci-fi action book called Hunter by James Byron Huggins. It came out in 1999, and Deadline now says that Stallone is going to be starring in a film adaptation of that book, and he's looking for a writer to write the script for that movie right now. So it's basically, the story is about Hunter, who is an ultimate tracker, and these military guys come and ask him about this, to participate in the secret mission that they're working for. And there's a beast loose somewhere north of the Arctic Circle. And there's all this, secret research facilities. And this military squad is getting wiped out by this beast. And it's a raging superhuman monster heading for civilization. And the Hunter's the only one who can track this half human, half animal abomination out in the wild. So, I mean, it sounds kind of nuts. I personally am just really disappointed that Stallone couldn't find a way to get that made as Rambo 5, because at this point Rambo as a character has gone through every permutation of realistic and unrealistic fighting, in terms of like I think in Rambo 2 or 3 he fights like the entire Afghan army or some some crazy thing. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but Rambo 4 was like insanely violent. He's like just ripping through guys in Burma, and the idea of the Rambo franchise just suddenly in the fifth entry going into sci-fi is kind of an exciting one. Just even though Stallone is like way older these days, I just feel like there's a lot of potential for I guess imbuing that franchise with a jolt of energy that it probably wouldn't have otherwise. I'm not exactly looking forward to Rambo 5 as it exists in its current form right now, because it sounds like this. Well, sorry.
Go.
I'm not exactly looking forward to Rambo 5 in its current form right now, because it just sounds like another cartel story. We've seen so many of those in recent years, but the idea of a sci-fi thing was really sort of fascinating. So I don't know. I'm not sure how this is going to be in with just Stallone being in just a hunter movie. But what do you guys think about this one?
It's strange because I don't feel like Rambo is that interesting of a character, and I would have been very interested in seeing Rambo in a go full sci-fi. I love when franchises kind of go crazy like that, or Jason's in space or whatever. It's just ridiculous. And I know it's still going to be Sylvester Stallone, and like I said, it's not like there's like something really that different about Rambo versus his other characters. But I feel like now that it's not Rambo, I have no interest in this. I would rather see, I want to see Rambo versus Predator. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, this very easily could be, just like a direct-to-video kind of thing with this premise, and depending on who they get to write and direct it, I feel like it loses a lot of potential being outside of the Rambo universe, but I don't know. We'll see.
HC, do you have any love for Rambo?
I do not, but I have a friend who's a huge fan of Rambo, and once sent me a paragraph through DMs talking about how the first Rambo was actually a very nuanced take on PTSD, and then it devolved into this jingoistic franchise, and that's all I know about it.
Your friend is very smart. That's absolutely true.
Okay, let's move on to our final story, and that is the early buzz for Bohemian Rhapsody, the biopic starring Rami Malek. HC, you wrote this up for the site. Is this movie any good?
You have to ask the critics because it's very divided right now. Some people say that it's a by-the-numbers biopic that gets duller and duller without Rami Malek in the center, and others say that it's a great and enthralling film. And emotionally exhausting is one of the words was used. But, for example, Kyle Buchanan of the New York Times calls the movie a glorified Wikipedia entry. LA Times' Kimber Myers criticizes it for being somehow too long while refusing to dwell on anything that's actually interesting. But everyone is universal in praising Rami Malek's performance as Freddie Mercury, the frontman for Queen, and this legendary singer who tragically passed away from AIDS in 1991. So he's already been sort of singled out as one of the top contenders for the Best Actor Oscar, according to Deadline's Pete Hammond. And again, everyone had words of praise for him, even if they didn't like the movie itself. People also singled out the Live Aid performance, which is considered one of Queen's best live performances ever.
Do you think that we've just reached a point where you can't just do a traditional biopic? Like, people are kind of, we're in a post-Walk Hard world where, that formula has just been done to death, and now if you're going to do a biopic, it has to be First Man?
I think so. I mean, whenever we have a new biopic trailer come out, our Slack always ends up posting one of the clips from Walk Hard because it always applies. And it's definitely, I think audiences, or maybe just film Twitter, has grown tired of something that we've seen over and over again, and that almost always gets a place at the Oscar table despite not being very good or original or new. So yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And Bohemian Rhapsody apparently doesn't really do anything new, despite having a really great lead performance.
Ben, do you have any thoughts on the future of the biopic?
Man, yeah, I guess that template is just so well worn at this point that if somebody can come up with a different angle on it, that I'm automatically going to be more interested. And that maybe it comes from the position of, somebody who watches a ton of movies, and maybe that doesn't apply to, the normal American families or people who just go see movies a couple times a year or something. Maybe this template is not as stale for them as it is for us, but I'm always in favor of people trying new ways to tell similar stories like this. So I don't know, Peter, are you going to see this movie? Because I feel really torn about it, knowing that it's a Bryan Singer film and there's all these allegations about him, and we don't have to get into all those details here, but just in general, I'm curious what your thoughts are about this film.
I think we talked about this maybe a year ago on this podcast, but I try not to let the personal lives of the artists creating the art affect my enjoyment of the art. But I've definitely been conflicted with that. You know, I don't love seeing Mel Gibson films. There are some people you're right, I should avoid this, shouldn't I?
No, I mean, no, I still haven't made up my mind. I think it's something that everybody has to decide for themselves. And it's just like, you know, where do you fall on the scale? How serious do you want to be about it? And it's not, yeah, like you're saying, I don't begrudge people who decide to go see this, because there are so many people who worked on this movie who are not named Bryan Singer, and their work probably deserves to be seen and celebrated. But it's, you know, it's one of those things like, if you pay for it, are you enabling, are you sending Hollywood the message that you still want to see Bryan Singer movies, that kind of thing? I don't know. It's a very complicated question. It's not something that we can like answer easily on a podcast. But I was just curious if you had any general thoughts about this movie. If you'd already made up your mind about whether or not you're going to see it.
Well, if I do see it, it's probably going to be at a press screening, so I would not be giving my money to the film. Although I have heard whenever they screen films for press, the studio actually has to pay for their own movie, essentially buy out the theater, and it counts towards box office. So
really,
I guess essentially by me going to see it, the studio is giving themselves money. I don't know. I'm not sure how that works. It's very strange. I don't know. Like I am also part of a film critics group, and if his performance is something that's going to be part of that conversation, I have a responsibility.
Yeah,
to see it
for sure.
HT, is your choice of seeing this movie or not affected by the artists involved?
I mean, I'm of the opinion that money talks best in Hollywood, and especially in box office. And I do think that giving my money to this movie will end up kind of lending to that message that Bryan Singer is in demand and will still be working. And like, he still is working. He got a major deal for that Red Sonja movie. So I don't think I would want to give my money to this movie, despite being a big fan of Rami Malek. I'm a huge fan of his work in Mr. Robot, and I would like to support him. But I would rather personally to avoid giving my money to this movie.
See, I'm kind of under the impression, maybe I'm just reasoning it to myself, but I'm under the impression that, like, if I went and supported Red Sonja or whatever Bryan Singer does next, that would be more detrimental than, going out and seeing this movie.
He did get fired halfway through, so who knows how much of it he actually was responsible for, too.
Yeah. If you guys have any opinions on that, send us an email at peter@slashfilm.com, and maybe we'll read it in the mailbag. HT, where can we find more of your work online?
You can find me every day at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at Hoai-Tran Bui.
Ben, where can we find you?
You can find me writing at slashfilm.com as well, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pearson.
And you have your video tour of that Titanic exhibit, right, on the site today?
That, I think, is going up first thing tomorrow morning, so look for that. It's a tour of Titanic Belfast, which is like the largest Titanic-related exhibit in the world.
Well, very cool. And you can find me at /film on all social media. You can find this podcast, /film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please go to our iTunes page, write a 5-star review, tell your friends, spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so I have one question for you guys. Has there been any movies that you refused to see because you didn't want to support the actors involved or the director involved?
Like the Daddy's Home movies, I think, I guess it was the second one specifically, because they hired Mel Gibson, and I was just like, I can't. That seems like so blatant to me. Like I guess casting him in a lead role is different than letting him be behind the camera, for me anyway. I know this is like a very personal thing for everybody, and people draw their lines in different spots. But that was like, I found that casting to be particularly egregious. To put him in, front and center in a family film, like I was just like, I have nothing to do with this movie.
On the other hand, I know that you do not like Johnny Depp.
That is correct.
But you will still see movies that have Johnny Depp in the movie.
I mean, I still haven't forced myself to sit down and watch the first Fantastic Beasts movie, and that's partially the reason. The other reason is just I don't have that much interest in it. So yeah, I don't know. Aishi, has there been any for you where you've just been like, no, I'm not doing this?
Well, I was in a tough place for Fantastic Beasts. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and I was kind of the hope, I guess, like holding on to a tiny string of hope that they would recast him, and that doesn't seem like it's going to be the case. But I probably will still see Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald, even though he's the title character and plays a prominent part. I just but in that case, I feel like the franchise is bigger than the actor, even if the franchise is sticking by him. Again, I have complicated feelings about it, but there have been, all the Mel Gibson movies since his I don't know what you would call it. Incident, yeah. His incident, I have definitely not been interested in or have gone on my way to see. Hacksaw Ridge was his directorial film in 2016 that was getting, I think, like some Oscar buzz. And I was like, I have no interest at all to see this. But that, again, wasn't like a huge conflict for me because I was never a big Mel Gibson fan to begin with. So it's just kind of something that I wouldn't have gone out of my way to do. Mm-hmm. I can't think of anything else. Like the Johnny Depp one is definitely the one that weighs the most on my mind. But I can't think of anything right now that
I love this dilemma. You're like on one side it's like Harry Potter, and the other side it's Johnny Depp.
What about you,
really
Peter? Is there any for you that you've avoided?
Not that I can think of. Maybe Mel Gibson, but I think it's been more of my opinion of him as a person has affected my enthusiasm of seeing things that he's involved with, and it's not like a calculated decision of I'm not going to go see films that he's involved in. It's just I'm not excited to see. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's not a statement. It just happens to align with your general interest level.
Yeah. I don't know, guys. It's a hard line, but I also think, HT, you do say that Hollywood makes all the decisions based on money, which is true. But I also believe that Hollywood takes the wrong lessons out of everything. I feel like if Bohemian Rhapsody does well, I don't think the lesson will be that, we need to hire Bryan Singer for more stuff. I think the lesson will be like, oh my God, biopics are back in style. We got to do more 70s biopics.
We're already getting some. We're getting an Elton John one, although that's doing something different too, which is interesting.
Yeah. No, that seems more fantastical. Yeah. I don't know, guys. This is a weird place to leave Peter. The podcast. Yeah. But we're leaving the podcast here. Have a good day.